present itself in many different ways. It could be face blindness, which is very common in autism. It's got about a 30% crossover. So it's an awareness of a sense, an awareness of a face. And it could lead into problems with bonding, socializing, etc. You've got object blindness, where you only see pieces of things, not wholes. And you can have meaning blindness, where the person needs to use a tactile associative way of exploring the world to gain meaning. I'm really struggling with that pinging, just to let you know. It's kind of derailing me ever so slightly. So agnosia is to do with not necessarily integration, but awareness. So the sensory organs are intact. And then what you can get is you can get both. So that is why I've made this separation. You can get both a person with perceptual challenges and integration challenges as well. However, it is important to make that distinction. So if you Google or look on search integration and perception, what you'll find is a different hypothesis, a different description, hopefully. If you want to get a more accurate description of perception in autism, I recommend Olga Bogdashina or Donna Williams. So they give some really good examples of sensory perceptual issues. So sensory integration, if you think about sensory input and volume and reaction, and what can happen is the person can have a reaction, an emotional reaction, physical reaction to the sensory input that's going on. And it's important, I suppose, to be a detective to know what sensory integration issues a person is having. Is it to do with smell? Is it to do with taste? Is it to do with sound? Those are just some examples. And then you can try and modify, if you can, the environment they're in. You can try and help with emotional regulation, with certain sensory issues. You can help with the ability to cope with certain sensory issues, and you can help, I suppose, in the greatest sense, by giving validation to the experience. So rather than saying, that isn't happening, I don't understand, which is understandable, because if there are gaps in knowledge, then you do struggle to know what to say, and in particular with gaps in experience. But if you want to really help the person, maybe with all the knowledge at hand, it is best to try and put yourselves in that person's reality and understand why this is going on, and show a sense of empathy, understanding, open-mindedness, working along with the person's profile, rather than butting heads. And butting heads or going like this with the profile is not necessarily a bad thing. All it proves is that you try a different strategy, a different method, and it has to be extremely person-centered. I know I talk about that a lot. Person-centeredness, empowerment that comes through being person-centered is extremely important. So alexithymia and psychosomatic amplification. So some people with alexithymia, which by definition is someone who doesn't process or perceive their emotional states. It's not a literal lack of emotion. It's not a literal lack of empathy. It's to do with perception. And some people who have delays in perception, and just bearing in mind alexithymia has an 80% crossover with autism. So emotional states and sensory information can cause amplification in those states. So somatic amplification can cause pain in some cases. So psychosomatic pain is pain that doesn't have an organic origin. It's pain that doesn't have an obvious trajectory. It's pain that could be resulted in heightened emotional states, and the inability to filter those emotional states then means that the person starts talking about pain, discomfort, feeling unwell. And this could be to do with a subconscious reaction to a very acute emotion. I also note that there seems to be correlation between somatic amplification and certain mental health conditions as well. However, they have done some correlations between Asperger's syndrome, autism, and alexithymia, hence why I'm talking about this. There's another condition called functional neurological disorder, in which the person gets these bouts of pain, and sometimes severe pain, which mimic, in some extreme cases, heart attacks and strokes. However, there's no firm organic origin that is literally happening. However, the pain receptors are firing in places which one would get these conditions for real. So what am I trying to say here? I'm trying to say how powerful the nervous system is when it's under stress. So what can help with this in terms of emotional states? The person in question may experience alexithymia very differently. So they could have mind mapping. They could have, if they're a visual thinker, they could have visuals which give them emotional connectivity, emotional association. They could have words that strike up meaning, association, and then the ability to internalize them and give them a personal experience. You could have people who are non-visual thinkers who are tactile associative, so they may use objects of reference, etc. And also we have to take into account the origin. So what has caused this? And we may have to wait a long time. The person may take hours, days, months, weeks, or even years to get to a point of awareness of origin, but you can do things to help. So if you look at psychosomatic amplification, Google it, research it, it's quite an interesting phenomenon in itself. One of the things I'd like to say is that people who get this chronically may be going to the GP quite a lot, talking about pain, and of course the misdiagnosis may be malingering or Munchausen's, etc. What's actually happening is very real. The brain is reacting in a certain way, causing pain receptors to switch on, and it's to do with the nervous system. And it can affect a person if they've got emotional, perceptual problems, sensory information input, and then, of course, the amplification that comes with that. So sensory perception is something different, as I've said. So we start off with a sensory agnosia. So you can imagine that if someone has got a blockage in information that they cannot see or hear from a perceptual point of view, it would make sense that they use other modulation to connect with the world around them. For example, I've been around people on the autism spectrum who I suspect to be face blind, and they come up to me and they smell my hair, they touch my face, they nuzzle into my neck. Why are they doing this? In times gone by, this may have been seen as bizarre or strange or something to be thought of. But what it is a blockage in information, and the person is modulating. They're using another way of gaining a connection with you. I've seen other children. I remember a young man at an autism base I used to work with who had meaning blindness. And meaning blindness is where you don't see the physical surroundings with meaning, despite the sensory organs being intact. And he used to look through things. So one of the signs of visual perceptual issues in some people is they look through rather than at. So they look through. It's almost like a tunnel vision. Good peripheral vision as opposed to central vision, stimming and flapping in front of their eyes because they're trying to take out certain pieces of information. So if you do that in front of your eyes, you're actually creating your own filter. And it's not just restricted to fingers, it could be arms, it could be something that they use. And what he used to do to gain an idea of the world he was in was he had a piece of tape, and he used to fling the tape on the floor, and where the end of the tape landed, he would jump on and he would feel with the back of his hand. He would connect with you by doing things like mouthing your back and frothing on it. And also I remember him doing that along a blackboard in one of the classrooms. And again, if his eyes aren't giving him the information required, he needs to use another modulation. And you could argue with him, it's an expansion of the face blindness, it's multisensory modulation. So he's not just using, his hands, he's using his mouth, he's using his body, he's using, saliva. If you think about some people that are from an external point of view, bizarre behaviours, they've got a function. I mean, some people with meaning blindness, with autism, may spit on surfaces. They may smear on surfaces their saliva. And what that could be to do, hypothesising, is to understand whether it's hot or whether it's cold. What does it feel like when I rub it? What is the sound? What is the feedback I get from when I do certain things with it? So it's building up, mentalizing in a tactile associative way. Other sensory perceptual challenges could be body agnosias and pain. And if one has that blockage in information can be quite dangerous. So I'm thinking of people who bathe and shower, people who like a preference for hot beverages and drinks and hot food. If the body isn't giving the information that there is pain and heat, you can be in trouble. So you may, again, have to modify environments. I know you can get thermos adapters for baths and showers, which is really useful. And I've heard of situations where a mother had to lock up the kettle because her son would just guzzle down hot water because his body isn't perceiving pain. And therefore, if it isn't perceiving pain, it's not going to send the messages that actually you need to stop drinking, you need to stop getting in that bath, you need to stop eating that food. Other things with body agnosis, maybe the person in question doesn't perceive their body as a whole, so they may be more akin to dissociating, something I used to do when I was younger. So what I do as a personal way of getting around that is wearing tight clothes, because tight clothes gives me awareness of my body in different places, different pressures, and gives me awareness that I'm living in a body. I beckon you to imagine what it's like if you had body agnosis so severe that when you took your clothes off, you become ethereal or like a ghost, because there was just no reference points to your body's connections. So hopefully you're getting an idea that we do talk a lot about sensory integration and hyper and hyposensitivity. However, I think it's equally important to talk about perception, perceptual challenges that come with some people on the autism spectrum. And here we go with the visual agnoses and making connections. As you can see, there can be some simple ways of giving context to the person. For example, with face blindness, you could use familiarity for the person, that, oh, that's you. Remember, the face isn't giving the information, so you need to think of other ways. So vocalizations, familiar songs, movement, maybe familiar pieces of clothing, earrings, glasses. If someone is object blind, situational association and tactile association, so physical, kinesthetic. Semantic agnosia, meaning blindness, allowing the person to sculpt and feel the environment, to externalize, even if it feels slightly uncomfortable, even if you do not fully understand it, even if, you know, we have to almost broaden our philosophical awareness of what is appropriate, inappropriate. If you gave a blind person a seeing book to read, you wouldn't expect them to do it. If we port that over to someone with visual perceptual challenges, if sculpting, tactile association and other modulations are the only way of getting meaning and association, would you deny it? It's a philosophical question. Then you can get some people with visual verbal agnosia. And I've met many of those that can sometimes be quite a conundrum for people who work with them. And some really get baffled by it because you present them with books or pieces of paper. And one of the things a young man used to do many years ago, and the teacher was baffled by it, was he used to post things with writing on. So that could be behind sofas, in the room, you know, stuffing it behind sofas very firmly. He's communicating something extremely strongly, or he would post them through the windows. And what I wondered with this young man looking back, because I didn't have enough information then, was visual verbal agnosia is the inability to read with comprehension. And if he was just getting this flood of information from words and letters and pieces of paper with words on, letters, books, and you can even get extreme reactions such as ripping up books, ripping up text. So maybe in that sense, if the person is having so much perceptual challenges around reading and writing to such an extreme, then you look at other ways for them to gain meaning, learn. So you could use objects of reference. That doesn't require words. Gesture, that doesn't require words. Music, again, words are within the language. However, music is melodic and ethereal and doesn't rely on books. So there's other ways of actually gaining context, gaining connections for people that have visual perceptual disorders on the autism spectrum. And what I've learned from this through researching it, trying it out, adapting it over the 10 years, is that no person is the same. And although that feels like a cliche, it's very true. You have to become a detective. Like I said on my fruit salad workshop, you have to become a detective, understanding which pieces are relevant to the person and then making reasonable, humane adaptations in your learning style, in your physical style, and even down to vocal style and other aspects of your person, so the person gets understanding and context and meaning. In other words, I suppose what you're asking for is their brain to become more settled. So expanding on the body disconnection, they may have self-care challenges. So I've talked about baths and showers. Self-care challenges such as, you know, toileting, urinating, shaving, etc. I still have those, and I'm 34, because I have trouble with pressure and body placement as well. It means that every time I do these things, it's a conscious effort to do them. But I try anyway. So, but that's through years and years of creating strategies, understanding where the challenges come from, and adapting. And also, I've noted actually, and it may even benefit me, that I need to find the link for it, that they've got these adapted shavers for people with sensory challenges. And what I assume what the shaver is, the razor, is modulating, you know, pressure and the ability to actually move around the face as a person shaves, which would be very good. Self-harm. There's a high rate of self-injurious behaviour if people have body agnosias, where the person has such a disconnect from their body that they may be biting down to the bone, causing dislocations, pulling teeth out. I've heard in extreme cases, and even one of the most disturbing cases, a woman told me of a young lady on the autism spectrum who pulled her eye out and put it back in. That was very disturbing, but also it pointed out to me how disconnected she was from her body to be able to do that without any pain. I've talked about food and drink, weather. So weather, the person may not be aware of states of weather. So they may wear things that would be considered inappropriate for the different times of the year, because their thermos may not be working. So the modulation of clothing, heat, or otherwise may not be there. So again, they may need prompting that maybe they shouldn't be wearing those clothes because they need to wear something else. Of course, that's very hard for some people because clothes may have significance to them, comfort, association, integration, and habituation. So the clothes may have lots and lots of significant things to them. So I'm only giving that as one example. But yes, weather can be an issue if you're not aware of pain or your body. And also, if we think about shoes and socks, things like that, the inability to recognise if the shoes are too big or too small. So you may get rubbing, chafing, blisters, etc. But the person's, again, not aware of this. So social emotional agnosia. This is common more in people with Asperger's syndrome. I know that's seemed to be defunct. But social emotional agnosia is the inability to see facial expression, body language, or hear tone of voice. It's called atonia. So if you think about that, all they're seeing and hearing is facts. So if you take away facial expression, body language, tone of voice, it's facts. So what can help? Lists can help. Practical, logical language, even when talking about emotions. And movies, TV programs may be a way of understanding the social emotional world, particularly in children and even teenagers who continue to watch preschool programs such as Postman Pat, Fireman Sam, etc. It has a base meaning, and I don't think it should be shunned that in those programs, socializing is more transparent. It's more black and white. It's more obvious in the person's, each character's intention, to the point where it's exaggerated or caricatured. But it gives an idea of how the social emotional world works. I've often joked things like, you know, old 80s TV programs like He-Man. I mean, it's ridiculously obvious that He-Man is the hero. It is so, I mean, it's the campness aside, it's obvious that He-Man is the man who's going to save the day. And with Skeletor, who lives on Snake Mountain, who's got all these minions around him, it's obvious that he's the villain. So that's the example I'm giving, that these exaggerated examples of good and bad, right and wrong, and social effect, cause and effect, could be very helpful for someone with social emotional agnosia. Personality types. This is something that doesn't get looked at in autism enough, is that all human beings have got personality types, which have their own specific social, emotional, perceptual sensitivities, ways of looking at the world, how you work, how you operate. You're even down to some of your belief systems are partially guided by personality types. And it's all about tolerance and cultural views and environmental and genetic factors, so hereditary factors as well. And I recommend a site called P-Types. It's a fascinating site where it goes through all the different personality types in great detail, and also goes through their disordered extremes, which is just as interesting. So working out the systems, what are the sensory perceptual challenges, if any, and how do they affect the person? What are the sensory integration challenges? Working out meaningful persona-centered strategies to empower and aid the person's well-being is the ultimate goal. So you work out the systems, you work out something that is meaningful to that person and the strategies to empower the person to be, in effect, the best version of themselves. And here are my books. I think the one that's most relevant is Life Through a Kaleidoscope, which talks about my life with visual perceptual challenges. That one is the most relevant. And on the second slide here with the books, I'd say it's Sensory Perceptual Issues in Autism and Asperger's Syndrome by Olga Oldebod-Dashina, a great authority on this subject. And a really good book for parents out there who are listening, How Best to Help an Autism Mum by Sharon King. I've known her for about 5 years now and her family. And it's a really cracking read about, a parent's perspective of having 3 children on the autism spectrum. And thank you very much for listening. Those are my topics, broader contextual topics and booking information. And then obviously, if you've got any booking inquiries, you can email me at stayperfect12@yahoo.co.uk. And thank you very much for listening. I will stop the share now, and I will pass it over to questions. If anybody's got any questions now.